Welcome back to True Crime Tuesdays on Fearsome Fiction. Today we're going deep into one of the most haunting and complicated criminal cases in recent American history, the Delphi murders. It started on a cold February afternoon in 2017 in the small town of Delphi, Indiana. Two best friends, 13-year-old Abby Williams and 14-year-old Libby German, went for a walk on a popular hiking trail near an old railroad trestle. They never came home. What followed was 5 years of anguish, dead ends, a viral piece of evidence the whole country watched, and then, finally, an arrest. But the story doesn't end there. Not by a long shot. This one has everything. A small-town mystery, a killer hiding in plain sight, jailhouse confessions, Norse paganism, and an appeal that's heading into court next year. Let's get into it. Act 1. The Girls on the Bridge. February 13, 2017. Delphi, Indiana. Population just under 3,000. It's a Monday. The schools are closed for a teacher training day, and two 8th-grade girls decide to spend the afternoon at Delphi Historic Trails, a local walking path that winds alongside Deer Creek and leads to a wooden railroad trestle called the Monon High Bridge. Abby Williams was 13. Libby German was 14. They were best friends, the kind of close that small towns produce. Inseparable, cheerful, completely ordinary in the best possible way. Libby's older sister dropped them off at the trailhead around 1 in the afternoon. They were supposed to be picked up a couple of hours later. They never made it back to the trailhead. When the family couldn't reach them and they didn't show up, a search began. The next morning, February 14th, Valentine's Day, their bodies were found about a quarter-mile from the bridge on private property near Deer Creek. They had been murdered. The details of how they died have never been fully released publicly, and investigators have held back certain specifics as part of the investigation. What we do know is that the crime scene was described as staged. The bodies were arranged in a particular way. Investigators believed almost immediately that this was deliberate, intentional, someone who wasn't panicking. But here's the part that changed everything, and the reason this case became national news within days. Libby German had her phone with her on that trail, and before she died, she recorded something. Act 2. The Video and the Voice. In February 2017, investigators released a brief clip from Libby's phone. It showed a heavy-set man in jeans and a blue jacket walking across the Monon High Bridge toward the girls. His face was partially obscured, his hands in his pockets. He walked with deliberate, unhurried purpose. Then there was the audio. 5 words recorded on that phone. Down the hill. That voice, low, flat, commanding, became one of the most analyzed pieces of audio in true crime history. Millions of people listened to it. Forums lit up. Tips poured in. Law enforcement called him Bridge Guy and asked the public for help identifying him. For 5 years, despite the video, despite the audio, despite thousands of tips, no arrest. 5 years is a long time to live with that. In those years, investigators quietly worked leads that went cold. They looked at registered sex offenders in the area. They conducted DNA testing. They followed up on hundreds of persons of interest. And the families of Abby and Libby lived in a community where the killer might have been their neighbor. Then, in 2022, something shifted. Act 3. Richard Allen. Richard Allen was a pharmacist's assistant at the local CVS in Delphi. He was 50 years old, married, quiet. He had actually called investigators shortly after the murders in 2017 to let them know he'd been out near the Monon High Bridge on the day the girls disappeared. An investigator spoke to him briefly and then moved on. 5 years later, in 2022, investigators went back through old tips and re-examined Allen's statement. They brought him in for another interview. At some point in that interview, Allen seemed to realize he was being considered as a suspect. He became alarmed. He was arrested in October 2022. The key physical evidence against him was an unspent .40 caliber cartridge found near the girls' bodies. Forensic analysis concluded it had been cycled through Allen's gun, a detail that prosecutors argued placed his weapon at the scene. There were also witnesses who placed Allen on or near the trail around the time the girls were there. And then, the confessions. While Allen was being held in solitary confinement awaiting trial, he made a series of statements to corrections officers and others. In those statements, he said he had ordered the girls down the hill. He made multiple admissions, some detailed, some contradictory. His defense attorneys argued that 18 months in solitary had caused a mental health breakdown and that the confessions were the product of a shattered mind rather than actual guilt. Act 4. The Trial and the Verdict. Richard Allen's trial began in late October 2024. It was presided over by Special Judge Fran Gull, brought in from outside Carroll County, given the intensity of local attention on the case. The trial ran 4 weeks. Prosecutors laid out the cartridge evidence, the witness testimony, and the confessions. The defense countered with a wild card. They argued the murders were a ritualistic killing carried out by local practitioners of Norse paganism, sometimes called Odinists. They brought in an expert witness to testify that the crime scene bore the hallmarks of ritual sacrifice. The judge did not allow that evidence to go before the jury. She ruled it lacked sufficient foundation. The jury deliberated for 4 days. On November 11, 2024, Richard Allen was found guilty on all counts, 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of felony murder. On December 20, 2024, Judge Gull sentenced him to 130 years in prison. Allen's wife stood outside the courthouse and told reporters, "This isn't over at all." She was right. Act 5. The case that won't close. Richard Allen is now serving his sentence in Oklahoma, transferred out of Indiana, reportedly for safety reasons. But his legal team has been filing aggressively since the conviction. In January 2025, they filed a motion to correct errors, arguing, among other things, that the timeline of the murders was wrong, that the search warrant for Allen's home was improperly obtained, and that there was a purported confession from a different suspect that the jury never heard. In December 2025, they filed a 113-page appellate brief raising at least 3 major issues: that the search warrant affidavit misrepresented witness descriptions to label Allen as bridge guy, that the exclusion of the third-party evidence, the Odinist theory, violated his right to present a complete defense, and that the suppression of certain evidence denied him a fair trial. As of right now, June 2026, the Indiana Court of Appeals has scheduled oral arguments for September 21, 2026. The case is very much alive in the courts, and the questions linger. Was the cartridge evidence strong enough? Were the confessions real, or the product of a man broken by isolation? Was there ever a credible alternate suspect? And what exactly happened on that bridge on February 13, 2017? Outro. The Delphi murders case is a reminder that conviction doesn't always mean closure. For the families of Abby Williams and Libby German, there is a verdict. There is a man in prison, but there is also an appeal making its way through the courts, attorneys arguing that the wrong man is serving 130 years, and a community in Indiana that has been living with this since Valentine's Day of 2017. We'll be watching the appellate arguments in September.
You're listening to Mark McNeese's Fearsome Fiction podcast. Mysteries, thrillers, and rare finds. Fasten your headphones